You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. If you're just joining us and you're listening in the car or on the app or the YouTube simulcast, we are delighted to have you. We've got a guest whose story has shaped the national conversation on immigration for over a decade. Jose Antonio Vargas is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He's an Emmy nominated filmmaker, a Tony nominated theatrical producer, and the author of the best-selling memoir Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen, now back with the newly updated edition. Jose, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Jose, in 2011, you did something that almost nobody had done. You came out publicly as undocumented in the pages of the New York Times Magazine, knowing that it could cost you everything you built. Take us back to that decision and then bring us to the now. Why did this book need a new edition for 2026?
Thank you for that. Now, mind you, this was back in 2011, and President Obama was in the White House. And at that time, President Obama was deporting about 300 to 400,000 people a year. And, so much so that immigration organizations were calling him deporter in chief, right? Against the advice of all these lawyers I had spoken to, I decided that I would publicly declare that I was in this country illegally. And my hope was that we could take this conversation that has been so, in many ways, concentrated about the US-Mexico border, about Mexicans in particular and Latinos in general, and make it broader. Because the reality is there are undocumented Filipinos, Indians, Koreans, people from the Caribbean, people from Africa. It's all people. So that was my goal, was to, how do we complicate this, and how do we make sure that we really humanize what the conversation is? Now, that was 2011. And of course, 4 years later, Donald Trump walked down that escalator and declared that he was running for president and made immigration the centerpiece of his campaign. Back then, to be honest with you, I thought I was so naive. I was thinking to myself, if you got in front of people, if you influence how the media shape a conversation, right? You write in the New York Times, you make a documentary for CNN, you get on the cover of Time magazine, all those usual things that when you grow up in the 80s and 90s, like I did, you would think matter. But in this era of mis and disinformation, of a fractured media environment, they don't. Like, I spend so much of my time explaining to people why there are 12 million undocumented people in this country. Isn't that amazing? How much we talk about immigration as a problem, and yet we can't. ICE is now, I was looking at this. ICE is now the highest funded law enforcement agency in America, more than every federal, state, and local police force combined. And yet, we don't talk about the fact that we have 11 to 12 million undocumented people and what the solution is to actually get people documents. It's costing us more money to lock people up and treat them like cattle than to actually say, wait a second, is it acceptable that 11 to 12 million people in this country don't have legal status to be in the country? So in many ways, the question I was asking in 2011, which is how do you define American, unfortunately, is even more pressing today than it was in 2011.
Yeah, and at its core, essentially, aren't we talking about paperwork? Isn't this about putting paperwork before people? The fact that all of this money is being invested, all of this fear has been unleashed, and really, it's all over someone's paperwork, not their humanity.
Actually, in the book, in Dear America, there's this section where I talk about, I was at an event in North Carolina, I think Wilmington, North Carolina, and this elderly Black woman comes after me after I had given a not very friendly lecture, because there were people literally, I think, yelling, saying to me, go back, go back to where you came from, all that. This elderly Black woman came up to me and she pulled out a piece of paper, crumpled, really old piece of paper. And she said to me, this is the bill of sale that was given my people. I think it was a great great grandmother. And she said to me, young man, how do you connect this bill of sale to the papers that you and your people can't seem to get?
Mm.
This is not about papers, young man. Think bigger. God, I will never forget that. And there, I think I was like, I was searching for her. Where'd she go? Where did she go? I was being accosted by some tea party. This is how long ago it was. It was like a tea party, some tea party people. And I couldn't find her after, but she had like dropped such a wise question, right? It is more than just papers. We live in a time, by the way, where there's almost 2 million undocumented people in the state of Texas. Is there a subway or bus system I don't know about in Texas? Because
Mm.
undocumented people can't drive in Texas. There's about 1 million undocumented people in the state of Florida. How do they get around? Right? So, never mind the green card and the passports, people can't legally drive in most states in America at a time when, I don't know, more than a third, if not half of all farm workers in America are undocumented. So clearly we're fine with making sure that we have strawberries for our arugula salads, but God forbid, right? God forbid people drive with a driver's license to get to work. Do you know what I mean? So to me, the inherent contradictions of this
Mm.
is something that Black Americans have always known about since this country was declared itself independent. So I think there's, to me, the questions I'm asking myself is, by the way, it's been fascinating the past couple of, when I came out in 2011, in the essay that you had referenced, I had a line in there that I would not have been able to survive in this country as an undocumented person if it wasn't for like I called it my own underground railroad of
Mm.
supporters. And my editor at the Washington Post, she had edited me during the presidential campaign in 2008 when I was a reporter. And for people listening and wondering how was I able to journalist at the Washington Post, E-Verify didn't work. I did not get caught by E-Verify. That tells you a lot about how E-Verify is, right? So this woman, Black woman, Lynn Duke was her name. She had passed away. She called me and she said, Jose, wait a minute now. Wait a minute. You can't use the Underground Railroad, which is a very specific term used for Black people,
Mm-hmm.
and use that about immigrants. Can you explain that to me? I was so glad. She's a great editor, so she was pushing me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wish she were alive today and hearing people like Charles Blow, other Black journalists and other Black intellectuals make that parallel about what was happening in the slavery era. Now, mind you, again, these are two different experiences. Black people who are descendants of enslaved people are not, and were not, immigrants. However, the systems that is terrorizing us
Mm-hmm.
have a lot in common. And to hear Black people in this terror acknowledge those parallels, to me, is beyond powerful,
Yeah, and,
and
and,
a
and
real opportunity for people to get together.
yeah, and one of the connection points in those experiences is the emotional and psychological toll. I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
The emotional and psychological toll of living for decades as, in your words, a contributing member of a country that doesn't consider you one of its own. There are so many of our friends and our neighbors, our coworkers, people that we're in community with that are bearing the emotional and psychological toll that you write about.
Well, that's why when I was writing that book, to be honest with you, I was like 38 when I started thinking about that book. And I'm like, I have the mind that life doesn't really begin till 40. So I was like, how can I write this book and feel like Toni Morrison, who's that photo behind me, won't be like, wait a second, have you really lived the life, Jose? You're not even 40 yet. And when I came up with that structure, that every undocumented in this country psychologically knows three things: you lie, you try to pass, and you hide. If you're undocumented, you know everything about lying, passing, and hiding. So that for me was to kind of underscore the psychological toll of what this is. And also, as a gay man, like I came out of the first closet when I was in high school. It took me 13 years to come out of the other closet, which is this immigration closet. And both closets have a lot of parallels, right? Like I talk like this because the moment I realized I was here illegally, that my papers were fake, was when I was 16 years old. And the first thing I said to myself, I can't talk with an accent. I have to get rid of my Tagalog accent, which is very specific. And thankfully, that was like the rise of R&B, hip hop in the 90s. I'm like, if I can like figure out a little bit like that, talk a little bit like Charlie Rose on PBS, if I can like figure that out, I can pass. I actually think all those years when I was at the Washington Post, they never wondered if I was here illegally because I sound the way that I do. People thought I was just Californian, which I thought was funny because I was like, wait a second. So have I passed so much now? Now, as I'm saying this, like a lot of people can relate to that experience of trying to pass, right? I mean, as a gay man, I think a lot of gay men still do that, right? They still try to pass. But that was my way of saying, I actually think for me, the greatest tragedy here is we as a country are refusing to see people as people. That's why we're not seeing what happened in Houston, Texas. It's not like we're seeing mass protests here, right? We're not, right? It's become so we have been so desensitized with how people are getting treated. And ICE, I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm watching like a villain, Marvel movie where ICE is literally a rogue agency just picking people up.
Yeah, and we're also watching Project 2025 be implemented right before our very eyes. Talk to us about how Project 2025 and the current administration's immigration posture, how it's reshaped the stakes that you outline with such clarity in your book.
Well, what I'll say is this has been decades in the making. Like Stephen Miller was called Pat Buchanan back in the 90s. I don't know if you remember when I was in high school, there was a book at the library called The End of Western Civilization. Like there were all these books written by white people about how all these immigrants are taking over and it's the end of America. There used to be at the fringes, right? And now they're actually running policy. Project 2025 is the culmination of a decades long, what is that great Toni Morrison quote? How, racism is built into scholarship. Racism is built into a lot of these think tanks out of Washington, D.C. that, studies, quote unquote, people, right? So Project 2025 has been the culmination of a decades long campaign to make these illegal aliens literally alien to us. Immigration is a big part of that. The reality is this country is more Black, more Latino, more Asian. We're in California, right? 60% of California is Latino and Asian. That's because of immigration changes. If you add Black people to that, and 1 out of 10 Black people in this country is a Black immigrant, the Black population in this country would not have increased in the past 30 years without Black immigrants, right? If you add that, that's 65 to 67% of California is quote unquote people of color. And yet you and I are still referred to as minorities when in reality we're the majority. So wait a second. So what are we talking about here exactly? So all of these definitions to me are suspect. And what is our version of Project 2025? Like, what is our version of that?
Yeah. I want to pick up on that when we come forward. I also want to connect this to our audience directly. A lot of us grew up hearing immigration discussions as a Latino issue or a border issue. But you make the case that this is fundamentally a Black and brown story, an American story, a family story. And so when we come forward, I want you to talk to us about solidarity and where you've seen it and where you think it's been missing. You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. More when we come forward with Jose Antonio Vargas, the author of Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen. 1580. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai and really delighted to be back in conversation with my friend, Jose Antonio Vargas. He is the author of Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen. And the book is back with a newly updated edition. And so run, don't walk to pick that up. Before the break, Jose, I was asking you to sort of, reflect on this idea that so many of us were been exposed to, those of us that were raised in California, not limited to us, but certainly this being our experience. A lot of us grew up hearing immigration discussed as a Latino issue or a border issue. But again, in this book, this timely book, you're making the case that this is fundamentally Black and brown. It's an American story. It's a family story. I've been thinking a lot about our solidarity politics, which seem to be fraying. Talk to us about solidarity, where you've seen it, and where you think it's been missing. Oh, you might be on mute. There you are. We hear you.
Oh, okay, great. I actually think solidarity is the question. I think it is the most important question facing us. How we see ourselves in each other. Just to break that down, right? Like how we see ourselves in each other. I think, even that phrase, which I, if you don't mind, let's hone in on Black and brown, right? Black and brown communities. Where do Asian people fit in Black and brown communities? Asian people in this country, and when I say Asian, I mean Filipinos, Koreans, Chinese, Indians. Indians are part of the Asian community. We are the fastest growing racial and immigrant group in America. 70% of all Asian adults in this country, 18 and above, are immigrants. 70%, which means Asian people are more immigrant than any other group of people in America. More than Latinos are immigrants. And yet, when we say immigrant communities, we say Black and brown, and sometimes we often leave out Asian people. And I think because we leave them out, they feel, and I'm now speaking for myself and also speaking for the kind of the reportage that I've been doing, people feel left out, and people feel grateful to be left out, right? Like I'm in places where I've been interviewing some people who think that being Asian were removed from people of color conversations, which I find baffling. I just got back from Ohio. I've been reporting on a book for 5 years now. It's going to come out next year, in which I basically document this country has added 52 million immigrants since 1965. No other country in the history of the world, certainly no Western country, has added that many people in that amount of time. Right? In the state of Ohio, Toni Morrison's Ohio, as I like to say, the largest immigrant group are Indians. Vivek Ramaswamy, whose policies can be intellectual. If we're being intellectually honest, a lot of his policies, someone can argue, are anti-Black. Has the potential of being the governor of the state of Ohio, and he talks without any acknowledgement of the fact that his parents would not have been able to immigrate to America if it wasn't for the civil rights movement that was passed in 1965, that Black people and their white allies fought for. I don't think you, as an Asian person or a Latino who benefited, or a Black immigrant who benefited from the immigration laws that were changed on the back of the civil rights movement, can talk about that without being honest about the debt that we owe the civil rights movement. And to be honest with you, as I'm saying this to you, I wonder how many journalists in Ohio covering Vivek Ramaswamy's race are equipped to have a racial context to talk about this campaign. Not a lot, unfortunately.
And speaking of the media, I mean, you have a call to action for readers to basically
Yeah.
be a better media and reckon with how social media distorts immigrant narratives. I want to zero in on that for a second.
Thank
Be
you.
a better media in an era of algorithmic driven outrage. What does that actually look like for an everyday leader, learner, or listener?
It means that you are actually the media. You are the media. It is your job when your uncle, your auntie, your cousin, some coworker says to you, "Oh, these illegals don't pay anything in taxes, or these illegals, or it's a crime to be in this country." It is actually your job to correct people. It is your job to make sure that people don't fall into that rabbit hole of mis and disinformation. Let me be very, very blunt about this. Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, and the MAGA movement has capitalized on the fact that when we talk about immigration in this country, most people don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't understand immigration as a process, which is why there's 11 or 12 million undocumented people in this country. And we're not asking, wait a second, like, why can't they all just get legal? The number one question I get asked, why can't you just get legal? As if all I have to do is like turn on a switch somewhere and poof, I'm an American citizen taking your welfare, right? When what I just said to you a few minutes ago, I bet you most people don't know that most states don't allow undocumented people to drive. I bet you most people don't know that it's not a crime for to be in this country illegally. It's a misdemeanor offense. That's why, and by the way, the system as it's set up, that's why there are immigration judges, right? There's criminal cases and there's immigration cases. Those two things are separate. But in the era of conservative talk radio with Rush Limbaugh, of Fox News, of Breitbart, of Ben Shapiro, the whole campaign to spread lies. We can only fight against that if individual people take it upon themselves to educate each other. Like, you can't be a practicing civic participant of this country and actually not educate people on what these processes are. In the same way, for example, that when my own relatives would say racist things, it is my job. I'll never forget this. And this is tying back to your solidarity piece. I'll never forget when I was growing up as an immigrant, I came here when I was 12. By the time I was 14 or 15, my grandfather's sisters would say things like, "Don't go to Oakland, black people are there." And I was a kid. I'm like, wait a second, what does that mean? And then I started asking myself, who told them that? Why did they believe it? And what is wrong with black people? Which should be really the number one question, right? So I had to, then when I know better, I had to basically confront my own, grandmas and say, "Lola, like, that's racist. Do you know someone who's black?" Like, I know a lot of people who are black. They're important in my life. And when you say that, you're talking about people in my life. So, in the same way that proximity, exposure, and how we deal with all the stereotypes, that cuts across all ways. And so, when I say you are the media, I think it is our job responsibly to make sure that people don't fall down these stereotypes and don't keep getting fed mis and disinformation. If everybody listening to us right now, if everybody can just go turn to somebody and say, "What's the solution? Like, how do we actually legalize people?" Isn't it tragic, by the way, that we're not asking that question?
Mm-hmm.
That our tax dollars are just being spent. How many kids could be going to college right now with the amount of billions of dollars we're giving ICE? Right? There's so many other ways we could be spending this money.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember I was actually at the White House reporting. I think it was the day of or the day after the Supreme Court TPS
Yeah.
decision, and I remember standing there, and Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff, came out and spoke to a number of us reporters, and he said something that I will never forget. In response to a question, he sort of flippantly said, "Well, you know, in response to Haitians being sent back to Haiti in its current state, he said, "Well, it can't be any worse than Los Angeles, St. Louis, or Chicago." And I've thought about this often. All the folks in that conservative ecosystem that might have read that or seen that soundbite and didn't see anything wrong with that.
And again, this has been a decades-long campaign. I mean, even I remember, and it was Toni Morrison who taught me this. Why do we call it the inner city?
Mm-hmm.
Like when we say things are urban, what do we really mean by that? What is that code for? And speaking of Haitians, by the way, let's remember a few days after the Supreme Court voted to keep birthright citizenship, a few days before that, for the first time in this country, this is the largest ever effort to de-document people. 300,000 Haitians are losing status that they once had, legal status that they once had. And I was so fast, I was watching Jake Tapper on CNN interview the Department of Homeland Security secretary, and the DHS secretary said live on air on TV, why has these Haitians have lived there for years and years? Why haven't they legalized their status? And Jake doesn't correct him. Because journalists themselves don't understand immigration as a process. So that I have a lot of work to do as a journalist, speaking to other journalists, to make sure that we actually understand the ins and outs of immigration as a process and not just what comes out of the White House.
That's right. That's right. In our remaining minutes with you, Jose, I want to ask you a question that may be on the minds of so many people out there that are tapped in. It's one that I ask everybody who spent years in a fight this hard. Where do you find hope right now? And not that performative hope, but that real hope, that hope that's really like a reservoir that you tap into on the good days and especially the not so good days.
To me, Baldwin and Morrison wrote all of it already. So when I think of Baldwin, for example, saying that whatever it is that I'm going through, somebody else has already gone through it and somebody else has already survived it and transcended it. But to be really specific, so I've been reporting this book, and the book starts in California and ends in Alabama. So I spent the week of Juneteenth in Alabama. People don't realize the largest concentration of immigrants in this country are actually in the South. It's not in the West, it's not in the Northeast, it's not in the Midwest, it's the South. So I spent Juneteenth, that day of Juneteenth, at the legacy sites that Brian Stevenson started. And if you have not been, it's worth the trip to Montgomery, Alabama. It's the most impactful experiential museum experience anybody can have in this country. And just to be reminded of what had to be survived and what still needs to be survived for Black people who built this country and made it what it is, that the fight is still happening and people have already fought it and are still fighting it. I actually find a lot of hope in that. I find a lot of hope in knowing the history that's already been overcome and that needs to be overcome. And this is where your question about solidarity is so important. Black history is American history. So therefore, non-Black people ought to know what it is. They should know what Rosa Parks did. We should understand the link between slavery to mass incarceration. We should be fighting for the rights of Black people as hard as we're fighting for the rights of immigrants in this country who are not, who are fighting to make sure that we have enough of a country that all of us can share. It should not be a zero sum game mentality, which is what Project 2025 is about and which is what Stephen Miller wants. They want us to fight each other. That should not be what we're doing. So I found a lot of hope actually being in Alabama, in Birmingham, in Montgomery specifically, just to be reminded of that.
Jose Antonio Vargas, the newly updated Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen is available now. Jose, thank you for your time. And more importantly, thank you for your honesty, your work, and your witness.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580, The Quiet Part Out Loud when we come forward. Thank you, Jose.